Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Gender Equation in Schools: How to Create Equity and Fairness for All Students, by Jason Ablin. Narrated by Stephen R. Thorne. Publisher's note: this audiobook contains references to material present in the print and e-book editions of the book. Introduction. I decided to go for it. After 25 years in formal education, working as a teacher and administrator in middle and high schools, I decided it was time to challenge some assumptions and see what would happen. In the fall of 2013, I took the position of principal at a well-regarded private pre-K through 8th grade day school in the middle of Los Angeles. I was ridiculously excited about the opportunity. I had never been a leader in a school with an early childhood and elementary school. I had read reams of papers and research regarding children as young as newborns through 10 years old, but I had never seen them in action, day in, day out. I was excited to get to know them, to support their growth, and to learn. Few doctors grew up in a hospital. Few lawyers cut their teeth in a courtroom. Few senators had their first life experiences in the halls of government. Teaching is the only profession where we distinctly return to the scene of the crime. Teaching is the only profession where you will already have spent, modestly, somewhere between 17,000 to 20,000 hours in the place you will later call your workplace. Yet for teachers, summoning the memories of childhood experiences can be productive, but can also be fraught with complications, reinforcing social trends that need a true revolution, such as the issue of gender. Many of my past students would gladly share that I never felt shy or inhibited about rattling them to push the larger agenda of growth. One of my favorite expressions for new teachers is that our job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. In a crowded auditorium at the beginning of back-to-school night at my new school in September 2013, with over 500 parents in the room, I decided it was time to make everyone uncomfortable. After introducing myself and expressing how excited I was about the coming year, I announced that I had a homework assignment for everyone in the room. I told the parents that over the course of the year, I wanted to hear reports back from them about how it was going. I made pointed eye contact with a number of women in the audience before making my next statement. Moms, you are now responsible for doing your math homework with your daughters when they need your help. No waiting for Dad to come home, no telling her that you're not good at it, no saying, call a friend. You need to dive in and support your daughters with their math studies this year. Use the internet, call someone and ask for help. Look at the materials sent home from the teacher to support. And no telling your female students that you were just not good at math in school. Dads, I turned my gaze towards several of the men in the audience. Your homework is to read to and with your sons. The internet does not count. It can be newspapers, magazines, preferably books. Pick subjects you both like, do the assigned reading logs that come home from school, go to the library together, whatever. You're to show your sons that reading matters. I paused for emphasis. I am calling many of you during the year to see how it is going. The crowd was silent, except for a few surprised guffaws. Looking at the women, I saw some nervous smiles. I imagined that they were thinking, how am I going to do this? I hate math. Is he serious? The men were harder to read. Many remained expressionless. Was I successful? I would give myself a 50% in touching a nerve or getting parents to respond as I requested. Starting with this first public speech in front of the school's parent constituency, I spent the next 5 years engaging the mothers of our community in this conversation. I received anxious phone calls asking how to do it right. Success stories, epic failures, mothers who, after their children had graduated and matriculated into high school, were still doing the emotionally grinding work of putting their past insecurities aside to make a difference with their daughters. Teachers reported to me that, for the first time, mothers were asking for videos demonstrating how the math was being taught. The teachers felt pressed to find more supporting materials, but also felt validated and proud. They were experiencing parents who were seeing how tough it was to instruct students in complex subjects like math. The teachers were also having, many for the first time, gender conversations with parents. The mothers were willing to try to transcend their own anxiety about math for the best interests of their children. In other words, they got it. It was humbling and a good reminder what pain and discomfort parents are willing to endure for their children. One mother, who found that her 7th-grade daughter was quite advanced in math, decided to take a parallel online algebra class. Her daughter, despite her talent in math, would grow nervous before exams, so the mother wanted to set a good example about overcoming stress. When I came to my first online test for the class, the woman told me, I broke down in tears. I couldn't get through the first 3 problems before I had to stop and shut my laptop. I was at work doing the test during lunch, and all my coworkers thought something terrible had happened. I told them it did. I had to take a math test. Mom shared this experience with her daughter, and the girl smiled throughout the conversation because she finally felt heard. I was sitting in an office by myself with nothing really at stake except my ego, the mother recounted. I had forgotten what it must be like to sit in some classroom with a group of overachieving math students constantly trying to prove that you belong. I had similar conversations with other mothers. Nothing that I have said to a room full of parents has mattered so much. In that regard, it felt like a victory and a major breakthrough, at least for the women. The fathers? Not so much. Just one dad over the next 5 years engaged me about the task I had placed before them. 1. This didn't entirely surprise me. Now, some of them might have taken the challenge and just didn't communicate with me about it. How shocking, coming from men. But I believe most dismissed my homework assignment for many reasons, obvious and subtle, which also speak to the profound work that we need to do regarding gender roles in our homes and our schools. Some said it was the wife's job to take care of schooling, or the teachers at this expensive private school. Some said their boys weren't interested in reading. Some said they spent time with their kids in other ways, playing sports, going to their games. Others said they were too busy, as the breadwinners, working long hours to support their families. And others were just plain afraid. I'm afraid that my son will see that I am not a very good reader, confided one father. English is not my first language, and it was hard for me in school when I came to America and had to learn how to read. Others admitted that they didn't like to read, that there was a contradiction between what they say and what they do. I say education is so important, but I never read. I do not take the time to learn new things. That I am a bit stuck, that I would rather wind down in front of a television than pick up a book. Perhaps people will think there is something different or wrong about me if I am an avid, passionate reader, that this is not what boys do with their fathers. I get upset, sad, and feel the pain when some father tells me, with a bizarre sense of pride, that he got through school without reading much or ever finishing a book. Statements like these represent a type of compensation in which men engage. As we will note further on, activities like reading can be associated with the feminine, very much challenging masculine constructions of the self. But I am by nature an optimist and hope that some fathers saw the point of what I was trying to communicate and decided to take some action, even if they never came to tell me about it. Now, some of you may be asking the obvious question, and the answer is yes. Mothers should also be doing math with their sons, and fathers should read with their daughters. Families and homes are complex, and throughout a child's development, they need different gender experiences at different times. But gender alignment and modeling, the idea that children look to the parent of the same sex for all sorts of cues, gestures, and attitudes to define gender, is very real. We cannot ignore how important it is to dispel the myths that have plagued both our boys and girls, whether regarding areas of learning such as math or literacy. Why the gender issue in schools? Why now? It is 1983, and I am a freshman at Vassar College in upstate New York. I am sitting in my American Politics 101 class with Professor Cy Plotkin. He is notable in my life for two reasons. He gave me a D on my first college paper, and his passion as an educator inspired me to major in political science and ultimately go into education. But something else happened for me in Cy Plotkin's class my first year of college that set me on a personal and professional journey for the next 35 years. He was discussing the galvanizing social movements of the 1960s and 1970s and how they shaped our current political system. The civil rights movement, labor, and indigenous peoples, to name just a few. What he said next stuck with me ever since. Without dismissing the impact of all these minority movements, Professor Plotkin said the women's liberation movement was the most important. Not because the others didn't matter, far from it, but because of the numbers. It's simple, he continued. How can you have over 50% of the country and the world's population live under oppressive circumstances, treated unequally, and it not have severe ramifications for our ongoing development as a human race? For the first time in my short life, I was overtaken and overwhelmed by an idea. Not just its rightness, but also its clarity, logic, and moral imperative. And yes, it did matter for this 18-year-old that an older man was making this statement. Gender matters both in terms of the message being delivered and in terms of who is delivering that message. Not only have too many men not taken the feminist movement seriously, but we refuse to significantly come to terms that we are at the heart of the problem. This is really on our shoulders to fix, within our schools, workplaces, within our families, within our houses of worship, and most importantly, within our hearts. For me to hear a man say these words was more than just coming to terms with a highly rational and thoughtful argument. It was a form of revelation. Plotkin was willing to humble himself and insert into his professional and personal framework this critical realization without apologetics. He knew and hoped he was shaping the minds of his students. I, at least, can account for the power of that moment. So why is this the beginning, for me, of this story? Why is this the personal origin, at least consciously, of your author's passion about gender in education? The beginning of the 1980s was an inflection point in the history of American education. It was the start of our country's turning away from the value of education as a central driver for the American democratic experiment. When the French intellectual Alexis de Tocqueville visited America in the early 19th century, He noted that every town he visited had two institutions, a house of worship and a school. Schools represented the promise and training ground for a free mind and the flourishing of this new democratic experiment. The fight for equal education has been hard fought and continues today, crossing gender, racial, and socioeconomic lines. There is no hiding from the fact that African American and indigenous peoples' school systems were specifically established and funded in such a way as to maintain inequalities and disparities. And the battle to create equal opportunities for women was a long and hard fight for justice. But I would contend that the argument for an equal education based on universal access is deeply rooted in our country's philosophical soil. Those in power who wish to subvert this reality do so with a largely perceived callousness and are regarded as attempting to subvert a fundamental American natural right. By the late 19th and beginning of the 20th century, this was nothing less than a revolutionary idea. This idea of an American education smashed notions of caste, social class, and institutionalized inequality, and gave legs to the idea of the American dream. American students had access, throughout their schooling years, to both an academic and industrialized education, which was denied to other students in other countries beyond the age of 13. Often based on tests which created elitist systems that favored the privileged or maintained deeply entrenched social and ethnic caste systems. In 1955 through 1956, nearly 80% of American students 15 to 19 were enrolled in full-time general education, versus a high of 30% in most European countries. And there, many more students could only aspire and were relegated to technical training, having been sifted out of the road to a college education by the time they were 13. Regarding gender, while acknowledging that access for women to the entire curriculum was restricted, scholars Claudine Golden and Lawrence Katz note that by the end of the 19th century, coeducation existed in all schools and in all grades in most U.S. cities. Rural schools were uniformly coeducational by 1890. They also record the reaction by educational leaders in Europe to what they observed in American schools, as they visited the Chicago Educational Congress of 1893. It seems strange, one of the German delegates from Prussia, to see boys and girls not only of 13, but even 16 years of age sitting together or standing in mixed rows. The French were even more stunned. Of all the features which characterize American education, perhaps the most striking, noted the female French Minister of Public Instruction, is the co-education of young men and young women, for it reveals to him a state of mind and habits which is entirely strange to him. More American women received high school diplomas in the 20th century than men, and more women today receive college degrees than men. As a matter of intended or unintended consequences, our founding principles fueled the ongoing feminist revolution, and the feminist revolution forced this country to begin to live up to at least parts of its own national mythologies through equal access to education. By the 1980s, however, this egalitarian vision and purpose of that education was morphing quickly. Education was being perceived as merely an economic driver, a means to an end. It was beginning to lack any real value in and of itself as the country turned its attention more fully toward post-industrialism, rampant consumption, and eventually enormous economic divides. As that greater purpose and dream began to fade, so did our educational systems. California is a great example of where the perceived value of a child's education and the quality of education seemed to spiral down together. California was the top-ranked system in the country, perhaps the world, in the 1960s and 1970s, and within 20 years, by the 1990s, ranked as one of the lowest. The perceptions regarding education and its value are always wrapped up in what we are willing to pay for. Proposition 13, which ostensibly froze property taxes in California, guaranteed the inevitable collapse of the system through inadequate funding. Ask any public policy expert what single factor contributed most to the decline of California's schools, and the answer will invariably be the state's retro version of Brexit, a referendum passed in 1978 on a wave of populist anger that was earth-shattering in its impact and has proven enduringly divisive, writes journalist Andrew Gumbel. Proposition 13 was not just a tax revolt. It was an assault on poor people and marginalized people of color, who were already receiving an inadequate proportion of the state's wealth to educate their children. None of this should come as a surprise, as its governor during much of this decline, Ronald Reagan, was associated with disparaging African Americans and portraying them as living off the welfare system. These types of associations between anti-welfare politics and post-industrialism suggest that education is something the state and the country should not even be paying for. What is taking place in 2021 is a frightening extension of the breaking of these educational natural rights for our students, and conservative forces are attempting to tighten their grip on what is taught in our schools. Recently, legislative bills in states such as New Hampshire are meant to directly destroy the promise of public education through privatization. State legislation in Texas and Arizona seeks to muzzle teachers on such issues as race and gender, even instituting a $5,000 criminal fine for teachers who speak of issues outside the standard curriculum. These efforts are directly targeted at silencing teachers speaking about their own gender and race experiences in the classroom. I have been thinking about this issue as a husband, a father, a son, and as an educator of children, big and small. I have gone from seeing gender as one important issue in schools to truly believing it is the critical issue of the day in educational systems globally. We face enormous struggles in human society: environmental catastrophe, extreme violence, authoritarian oppression, race discrimination. But without creating equality and the physical safety of mind and body, for, as Sy said, over half of the human population, we do not tap into the best of human society to solve these other global dilemmas. It is also a narrative of constant and unnecessary compromise and narrowing of expectations for our students. As Shauna Pomerantz and Rebecca Raby point out in their study, Smart Girls, Success, School, and the Myth of Post-Feminism, while females are rocking school and achieving ever-high attainment, even in fields which were traditionally aligned with male learning, a post-feminist argument leads us down a precipitous set of assumptions. With the playing field presumably leveled, complaints of sexism now sound antiquated, whiny, and wounded. With gender inequality considered a thing of the past, girls are now seen to have unlimited access to success. But the flip side to this belief is that girls can no longer cry foul when they experience gender inequality. Sexism is framed as a personal rather than social defect. It is as if their success in school forces them to compromise their demands for an equitable society when the exact opposite should be true. The point of addressing larger issues of gender in schools is because we want the larger society to shift its access to greater equity and fairness. That should be the entire point. We just are not there yet, and work needs to be done. And I would argue that where females are forced to make these compromises, access to the full educational system in exchange for their political and social silence, many men are just giving up entirely on the entire endeavor of education. The National Center for Education Statistics, while showing significant gains for women in post-secondary degrees from 1970 to 2018, reports that the number for men completing degrees is in rapid decline. Men seeking associate's degrees at two-year junior colleges declined from just under 60 to 35%. Bachelor's degrees from just under 60 to 40%. Master's degrees from 60 to 38%. And doctorate degrees from a staggering 85% completion rate to 35%. The reasons for this massive decline are still up for debate. However, if what we know about the construction of our narrow patterning of masculinity is correct, that men tend to define themselves by what is not feminine, and the larger endeavor of education is perceived as feminine, the answer to this damaging phenomenon may be right in front of us. With men also 28% more likely to drop out of high school than women, the practical and social implications are very real. If we increase graduation rates by a mere 5%, the results are a staggering $18.5 billion reduction in crime costs and a 20% reduction in violent crime nationally. So, where is the place to start? In Ronan Farrow's 2018 New Yorker expose on yet another major media figure and corporation mired in allegations of inappropriate and abusive treatment of female employees, he concludes, "Experts told me that addressing patterns of harassment at a company as large as CBS generally depends on reform at the highest levels. This sort of conduct is tied to overall climate, and oftentimes to how women are seen or valued within an entire organization." Fatima Goss-Graves, the president and CEO of the National Women's Law Center, commented in the same article that there's no question that the head of the organization sets the tone for the entire organization. There are woefully too few women at the helm of politics, in boardrooms, and generally in positions of power. Women's sports are not allotted the same resources as men. We have yet to see a female president or an across-the-board equal pay for women. Sexual violence and harassment are hideously common. A woman is assaulted every 72 seconds in the United States, and 9 out of 10 victims of rape are women. Principals and school administrative leadership are predominantly male, teachers are women. We are way late in the game if we are trying to realign adult institutions and re-educate adults, some of whom have been entrenched in these attitudes and behaviors since they were children. The place to put our most sincere efforts and resources is in that all too undervalued and all too critical environment called schools. And the work goes beyond just dignity and respect. This is a global safety concern, ranging from the humiliating and debilitating experience of workplace sexual abuse at all strata, to mental and physical abuse, to rape, to honor killings. We are not truly living in a human society as long as these realities exist. Through work with young children, partnering with parents in the home, we can move the needle on this problem. What decent parent wants their daughter to feel that she cannot be the best version of herself and contribute to society, or perhaps merely existing without fear for her very safety and sanity? What decent parent wants their son to even play?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?